بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى
No, but indeed man transgresses,
أن رآه استغنى
because he sees himself self-sufficient.
إن إلى ربك الرجعى
Indeed, to your Lord is the return.
أرأيت الذي ينهى
Have you seen the one who forbids
عبدا إذا صلى
a servant when he prays?
أرأيت إن كان على الهدى
Have you seen if he is upon guidance
أو أمر بالتقوى
or enjoins righteousness?
أرأيت إن كذب وتولى
Have you seen if he denies and turns away?
ألم يعلم بأن الله يرى
Does he not know that Allah sees?
كلا لئن لم ينته لنسفعا بالناصية
No. If he does not desist, we will surely drag him by the forelock.
ناصية كاذبة خاطئة
A lying, sinning forelock.
فليدع ناديه
Then let him call his associates.
سندع الزبانية
We will call the angels of hell.
كلا لا تطعه واسجد واقترب
No, do not obey him, but prostrate and draw near to Allah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Radio Ramadan 87.7 FM. We are also live on our website rr365.co.uk/listen live and on our Facebook. Today it is 18th of Ramadan, 18th of Ramadan, and Iftar in Glasgow is 8:18, 9th of April 2023, 18th of Ramadan, Iftar in Glasgow at 8:18. I'm your host Zubair Akram, and my guest, as always, Sheikh Ridwan, on Surah Alaq, and you have listened to some of the, ayah number 6 until the last ayah. Yesterday we finished off the program with how praying in public can also mean public expression of faith. It's not just praying, the act of praying, and it is saying with your being, with your words, that I believe in there is one God and no one else, and whatever comes with it. And how people who represent Abu Jahl in this day and age, those characters still exist. So there are three characters in these ayahs that we discussed. One is the character of Abu Jahl, and the other character is Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself, alayhi salatu wasalam. And there is a character of the listeners, you and I, who are watching, witnessing this encounter. Sheikh, is this Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Will this be a fair summary of what we heard yesterday?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So yesterday we kind of talked about this section of the Quran, Surah Alaq, which is a narrative, a kind of explanation and a presentation of the events that took place in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, specifically related to Abu Jahl. So Abu Jahl is historically a very famous individual, and you've kind of personified it in three characters, three individuals who are part of this narrative. One is the Prophet ﷺ, who is the elevated prophetic character, noble character, and then you have Abu Jahl, who represents the complete opposite, the nemesis. The nemesis is the kind of the other side of the coin, and then we are brought into it, like yourself, myself, in the reading of the Quran. Ara'ayta. So Ara'ayta, essentially it's asking for your opinion. But remember, when you ask for opinion, when something's very, very clear, it doesn't require you to say yes or no. It's a rhetorical question. it means that it's clear. It should be very, very clear what the answer should be. And so that's the three components of the chapter, this section of the Quran, and it's asking us to make a judgment, to choose sides in a sense, because Fir'aun, as mentioned before, is described in the Quran as having committed tughyan. So, idhab ila Fir'auna innahu tagha. So Allah says this to the Prophet Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, go to Pharaoh because he's encapsulated tughyan, tagha. Tagha in Arabic can mean to over. I mean, in the Quran it also uses the verbal forms of tagha to mean like a kind of a tsunami or a flood. So it's like this it's when something explodes beyond its normal realm, and it goes beyond the bounds of what it should be doing, and it becomes oppressive. That is called tughyan. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, it's interesting because the Prophet ﷺ also said that Abu Jahl is the Fir'aun of this community. So it's interesting that when the Prophet ﷺ is being presented with his arch nemesis, the arch enemy of him ﷺ in his mission, historically the mission, it is Abu Hakam. Abu Hakam, that's what his name was, Amr ibn Hisham. He was from the tribe of Bani Makhzum. Makhzum was a very powerful, it's like a warrior tribe. It was an arrogant tribe. And remember, Khalid bin Walid is from that tribe as well. He became Muslim and he used his military prowess. But they had this this thing in for Bani Hashim. On the back of Bani Abdul Manaf, which is Prophet Prophet's direct tribe, on the basis that they were given the kind of custodianship of the religious rights of the Kaaba. So, in terms of order, even if you look at pre-partition India, for example, you look at Hinduism, it has a caste system. The caste system is made up of different levels. At the top of it is a priestly class, the Brahmin class, which is in charge of the place of worship and so on and so forth. And then you have the warrior class, and then you have the farmer class, and then you have the kind of slave underbelly of society, and you have the kind of untouchables. That's how, even to this day, Hinduism classifies human beings. And so at the top, in pre-modern society, it was always like that the priestly class, the people that had the custodianship of worship and devotion to the Creator, were the most elevated of people. And so Bani Makhzum always had this thing in for the tribe of the Prophet ﷺ historically, because even though they were warriors, they weren't given the highest class. And so Tughyan here is to this arrogance that comes out of wanting something you can never get. And so this happens in day-to-day life as well. If you are unqualified for something but you still want it, you end up doing things which are outside what you should be doing to get what you get. So if you're uneducated and you're defeated in an argument or a debate, then you lash out. This is what people do. They lash out, or they ignore, or they do something that is not involved with the thing that they should be doing, which is to educate themselves and then engage. So Tughyan is one of these things which is mentioned about Fir'aun. It's mentioned here about Abu Jahl as well. The reason why it's mentioned about Abu Jahl is because he's mimicking the mindset of you would say Fir'aun. So it's an interesting thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this specific context, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning this, and there is a number of things that are probably quite important to understand. But it's important to, I think, in a historical sense, to understand this from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, because, Abu Jahl, he was initially called Abu Hakam. He had his own trajectory. He saw the Prophet ﷺ coming and becoming the spokesperson for this religious tendency within Quraysh society. And it's well known that his end is not good. He's killed in the Battle of Badr by, I think it was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. And what is interesting, that throughout his life, he was considered to be at the forefront of torturing people that entered into Islam. He's famously known to have tortured Sumayya bint Khayyat radiallahu anha, the first person that was martyred, in fact, the mother of Ammar bin Yasir radiallahu anhu. A very heart-wrenching narrative of being tied up and being given deprived of water and being tortured and then being stabbed, essentially, and left to bleed to death. So there's a number of things that I think come to mind when you talk about this chapter and the way that it ties in with the historical narrative of Fir'aun, and also the end as well. The end of Fir'aun is a tragic end, but it's a humiliating end. The end of Abu Jahl is a tragic end for him, but it's a necessarily humiliating end. And it all comes from the fact that what goes around comes around. You know, you'll know this idea of whatever you do will also track back and come back to you. And this is why with Abu Jahl, he in this situation, we mentioned yesterday the kind of narratives that are mentioned in hadith collections about the Prophet ﷺ in praying, and then Abu Jahl saying, if I see him pray, I'm going to stamp on his neck. And he doesn't do it. But he does, prior to this, he instigates opposition to the Prophet ﷺ, and later on, he does through the entrails of a very famous narrative that he saw the Prophet ﷺ praying, and he was just so moved in with hatred against the Prophet ﷺ, that he asked one of the young people amongst them to get the entrails of camels. So you slaughter a camel, you get whatever comes out of the stomach that you don't eat. He said, bring it, and they brought in a bucket and they poured it over the Prophet ﷺ while he's praying. And what happened is that at that point, the Prophet ﷺ got up for prayer. It was his daughter Fatima radiallahu anha that cleaned the Prophet ﷺ from the entrails of the camel that were thrown on the back of the Prophet ﷺ by Abu Jahl. And it shows this dughyan, this kind of overwhelming sense of anger and enmity, which blinds you to thinking correctly. And this is the same thing with Fir'aun, that his arrogance and his enmity to truth and his enmity to the prophets that were sent to Bani Israel was such that it led him to oppression of other people. And this is the same thing, because Tagha in Arabic actually means something that's very elevated. So the kind of tip of a mountain or the higher portion of a plateau is also derived from the same root. And it's because the higher you get, the more notoriety you get, even in public life, to be honest. The more famous you get, the more notorious you get, the more coverage you get. The higher you get, the faster and the harder you fall. But the higher you get, the more arrogant you get as well. The sense of entitlement, the sense of privilege, the sense of invincibility, which comes all the time. And people in that situation have to be humbled by prophets. And this is why prophets, when they come from the lowest lay of the land. They're not the kind of military leaders. They're brought up to that, like the Prophet Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam, the Prophet Sulaiman, and the Prophet ﷺ as well, brought up from a normal life, a normal life of being a shepherd, of being a carpenter, of being, a person that just deals with day-to-day things. They work themselves up with humility, and when they get to the pinnacle, like Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, they get to the pinnacle with humility. And so if you think of the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, they oppressed him, they overstepped the mark with him, and when he had to deal with them when they came into his company at the end of the story of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, he forgives them, because that is the clemency, that is the mark, the calling card of prophets. He said, La tahriba alaykum al-yawm. And so when you see the Prophet ﷺ in the same situation in the conquest of Mecca al-Mukarramah, what you see is he has worked himself up from the humility of Ghari Hira to the majesty of conquering the city in which he is born, and then meeting the people that were oppressive to him and his companions, and the ones that tortured his companions, the ones that threw him out of the city. And Prophet ﷺ, remember, when he left the city of Mecca al-Mukarramah, he looked back in it and he said, how beautiful are you and how beloved are you to me? And if it wasn't for the fact that my community threw me out, I would never have left you. This is the love he had for Meccatul Mukarramah. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ, you know, if you just go back right to the beginning of the chapter, Surah Alaq, the Prophet ﷺ goes to visit Waraq ibn Nawfal. And and I remember what comes up in that narrative is Waraqah says they're going to evict you from Mecca. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Awa mukhrijiyahum. You know, he couldn't believe, he couldn't fathom the fact it would get to the point that he would have to be expelled from and exiled from the city that he loved so much. He couldn't understand it. So even Arabic, Awa mukhrijiyahum, you know, will they even think of that? Will they even contemplate it? Will it actually happen? It happened. And that was the Tughyan. That was the Tughyan of Abu Jahl and all of his compatriots. And he was in fact called the Asad. He was called the lion of the people that were of the Ahlaf, the people that opposed the Prophet ﷺ, because he was always the one that instigated violence against the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, at one point, he really viciously attacked the Prophet ﷺ. And it's very famous in Sirah. Hamza radiallahu anhu was coming back from hunting, and he came and he was about to go and do the tawaf, as he always did because he was a religious person, but he was a polytheist at the time. He wasn't a Muslim. And he met a woman and she said, did you see what Abu Jahl, you know, at that time Abu Hakam, it did to your nephew? And he said no. And she said he insulted him and viciously attacked him. And he went straight to Abu Jahl. He didn't say, what did you do? He cracked him in the jaw. And he says, what do you say of a person for whom I am the defender? And whose religion I am on? Which is, in Sirah, it's like one of these situations is like bang. It's like a mic drop moment, as they say, where everything just, the Sirah takes a completely different turn. The moment that he smashes Abu Jahl, you know, this supposed lion in the jaw, and Abu Jahl is not weak. He just looks at him, and he basically says, "Okay, it won't happen again." You know, this is like taming the lion. It's like, you know, that's when they say the zookeeper comes in. When lions roar, you know, they have it in Turkish. You know, the dogs bark and the caravan continues. And lions roar, and when the lion roars, but when the zookeeper comes, you know, with his whip, and humbles the lion, it's everything, you know, falls into place, because lions are ferocious, but human beings are intelligent. And anytime you have a kind of situation where the lion and the human comes into contact, lions never win, because they always call them the kings of the jungle, but the thing is, you know, that's not true, because lions will live in jungles. But anyway, that's a different issue. They live in savannas and flatlands. It's tigers that live in jungles. But it's interesting that this parallel of Fir'aun and Abu Jahl is something the Prophet is saying, this is what's going to happen. And obviously we know the story of Fir'aun. The Prophet is told that because he knows what will happen to Fir'aun. He's just told it for tasalli. He's told it. And cyclically, this is the same thing. In human history, this is the same thing.
Sheikh, there is this, a question that always is under discussion, that, okay, you can find Abu Jahls, you can find Pharaohs, but we are weak, and is there ever going to be a character who will match Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Not. So Prophet ﷺ, the way he displayed humility, the way he humbled himself, he conquered the same city that he was ousted from, and the way he entered the city again, and how he forgave. Is this something, okay, we are asked to emulate, but can we ever?
Can we ever emulate? The thing is, we can never compete. We know that. Like, there's no a Muslim trying to compete with the Prophet ﷺ is not even on the table as a discussion. But what is on the table as discussion is what's on the table as discussion is that you know the blueprint, and then you try and follow the blueprint. That's it. And so, even non-Muslims that follow the blueprint, achieve. Like Nelson Mandela, I was speaking to somebody else about Nelson Mandela and some of his, I think you mentioned it, Ibrahim Rasool. Was it yourself? I think we were discussing something in South
Ibrahim
Africa.
Rasool, yes.
Yeah, and
Yes,
he
we
was
did.
telling me something,
Yeah,
a story, because this person did a podcast with him, and he was saying that when he interviewed him, he was asking how did Muslims, deal with the issue of apartheid, and what happened is he said that Ibrahim Rasool was approached, and Nelson Mandela, when he was released from prison, in fact, before that, he told Ibrahim Rasool, get the Muslims ready for the fight against apartheid and the oppression that was there. And when he came out, he went to meet Ibrahim Rasool, and he said, "Are you ready? Are the Muslims ready?" And he said, "What do you mean ready?" He says, "Are they ready to bring down apartheid? Because apartheid is essentially about just the freedom to exist, the freedom to." The prophetic call was to banish this idea of race and ethnicity and class being something through which you actually segregate people. It wasn't even prejudice. We're not talking about hate speech. We're talking about the fact that you're living in prisons based upon the color of your skin from the moment you're born. And so what happened is Nelson Mandela, in modern human history, there is no manifestation of the prophetic model, I believe, better than Nelson Mandela's, in terms of diffusing, after he'd done what he'd done, he dismantled apartheid, diffusing that thing to the point that, the animosity against white Africans and the natives of that land was diffused to the degree that it could be humanly possible, I think. Even though if you think of what happened during apartheid and then how it just dissolved smoothly, it was all in the back of this very intelligent, very humble man, and very, very dignified man. If you look at what he talks about when, Mullah Protect Palestine and Al-Quds, his stance on Quds, for example, so principled, such a principled take on everything, that he wasn't swayed by the fact that he was courted by the West, and almost like he could have been the perfect poster boy for the West, but he refused. When he came and he was asked about Palestine, for example, he put everybody in their place, to the point that everyone was gasping, saying, you're supposed to be the poster boy of liberal values and all the rest of it. And he's saying, look, this is in some ways worse than what we were suffering during apartheid. And so Ibrahim Rasool and Nelson Mandela, these people, they ended up prioritizing things, and then the blueprint of the Prophet ﷺ of overcoming social tyranny, they essentially applied it. And so the problem we have is, if you come into the modern age without mentioning examples and situations, we refuse to use that methodology, and we insist on allowing the very modus operandi of Fir'aun to dictate how we should act, which is again attack with violence and attack with what they attack us with. And the intelligent person is seeing, if we are being cornered in a situation, we look to how we can remove ourselves from that, and not just say they're using something, we use it. Violence is a perfect example. In this day and age, the use of violence in a way that it can be misrepresented by your enemy to show that you are aggressive is a counterproductive strategy. Every intelligent person knows that, but we insist on doing everything in the same way. But with the Prophet ﷺ, this idea of gradation and analyzing and long-term planning is something that the Prophet ﷺ would have thought about and insisted on, because it's the way the Prophet ﷺ allowed his whole life to evolve, and he allowed the implementation of his prophetic blueprint to be imposed upon a society, to be applied and to be taken up by a society successfully. And when he left it, he left it.
We have the confidence in saying and believing that, okay, Prophet ﷺ did what he did. His teachings are for us to follow without a shadow of a doubt, in a sense that, oh, he was a prophet. I mean, there is always an argument, oh, he was a prophet, we can't do this. We can't be ever at that standard. So how can we do, why are you asking us to do what he did? Because we can't. he was a prophet. He had divine intervention on daily basis, on hourly basis, maybe on every moment basis. And whatever he spoke out of wahi, not himself. And what he so eh, are we this wrongs that exist? How do we with confidence say that we can follow the example of Prophet ﷺ, and be exactly the way or very similar to the way he was?
Well, the thing is, in any kind of plan, you have the optimum, the way that this is the plan, this is how you should do it. If you can't do it, you do as close as it as you can. So the whole point of having the optimum, which is the most perfect way of doing something, is that if you want to, make a car, if you want to paint, a sketch, for example, you want to make anything, there's a perfect way of doing it. If I say to you, can you make a knife for me from scratch? Like, what we can do, I'll show you how to do it. You might not have the equipment, you might not have the expertise. At the end, you'll come up with something trying to get to where I am. So I'll say the perfect example. If somebody showed me a Damascus metal dagger a couple of days ago, and he was saying, well, this is something that was made by one of my friends, and this is what he does, and it was amazing. But I said to him, like, Damascus steel, modern man doesn't know how they made Damascus steel. Is much stronger in the past. So this is like what they did in the past, modern man cannot do. So if you asked like Elon Musk to make Damascus steel, he can't do it. How many billions does he have? Can't do it. So even if, but you don't say, well, Damascus steel, you don't, it's irrelevant. It's relevant because it creates the benchmark. And so the Prophet, when he came, he created a benchmark. And so if you can't get to 95% of it, you get to 50. If you can't get 50, you get to 5. If you can't get to 5, you get to 1. The point is, that is the ask, is that. And the closer you get to it as a community, the closer you get to it, the better you become, and the closer success you become. And so if you fail, you try again. And this is the thing that our community doesn't like. I know, because I educate, this is why I teach. People want to come into our classes that we do in iSyllabus, and they want to learn everything within a couple of weeks. And 5 years later, they're saying, oh, we need to, they realize, oh, you can't learn this quickly. And there has to be some kind of humility and humbleness at all times, even when you've finished years and years of study. And so what happens there is this humbling experience that you have to plan. And success does not come in any field of human endeavor overnight. You know this, and why do I have to say this? If it's so clear, nothing in human life, unless you want to win the lottery, and there's studies done on, this came to mind actually, studies on people that win lotteries. And I read all these studies. You know why I read all these studies? Because it gives you insight into human behavior. And because when you're speaking to somebody and they don't know what they're talking about, it's actually good to come up with studies that show that what they're saying is completely incorrect. There's studies done on human happiness in people that win lotteries. Within a year of winning a lottery, people that won the lottery in terms of sense of happiness and fulfillment is well below people who haven't won it. In fact, are in the opposite, are going through difficulties. Like there's this curve and it goes way under where they were at the start.
Yeah.
So imagine you were here, and then your happiness goes up, and then it goes down. It gets to where it was, and it dives. That's what happens, and that's because you've changed the sunnah of Allah. The sunnah of Allah is you go up step by step, saying Alhamdulillah, Shukru Lillah, Alhamdulillah, Shukru Lillah. You get to the top, and you say La tathriba alaykum al-yawm, or you say Alhamdulillah ala ni'mat al-Islam. You get to the pinnacle, and you do sajda, like you do what the Prophet Yusuf did when he became the highest courtier in the land. You do what the Prophet did when he conquered Mecca al-Mukarramah. You become more humble because you've done it step by step. Now, the Ummah, what does it want? And this came up, you know, in this whole discussion we've been having on the political situation and this issue of takfir we've been talking about. Everyone is so embarrassed by their own silence over the last 10 years that they want to essentially, you know, they want to lash out at something and they want to make themselves feel good. It's not the sunnah of Allah that you get what you want by being angry over the last week or month or whatever, and just not looking at the fact of where were you in this whole situation. You know, the moment it comes back to individual, I know it's myself, then you look at yourself and you say, okay, in this whole scenario, this whole play, this whole pantomime that's playing out, where were you in this whole situation? The more people are vocal, the more you know that they're complicit. And the only way you can hide your complicity and your cowardice is to lash out and to be, you know, kind of more strict and more dismissive and more ignorant, and insist on your ignorance. And this is knowledgeable people as well. So this is it, you know, this is when the hens come back to roost. You know, this is when the hens come, because at that point the tughyan is the only way you can respond to it. You can only do it by, you know, just lashing out everybody. And what's the path of wisdom? The path of wisdom is to take stock. So take stock and say, okay, what's happening? Okay, this is the situation. This is the Sharia rules. This is the social kind of concern we should have. This is the kind of political kind of you know, things that we should be doing. That's an intelligent thing to do. But the stupid thing to do is what's been happening over the last, you know, month or so, you know, played out as a comedy. And in that comedy, there's very few lines.
Surah Alaq Ara'ayta alladhi yanha. Did you see him who forbids? And Abadan idha salla, a servant of Allah when he prays. And then it goes on to, did you consider what if he is on the right way? And this is for me and you who are watching and enjoying this piety. A short ad break, and inshallah I'm going to ask Sheikh the connection and the meaning of this ayah and enjoying piety. How do we do that? Do we have a duty towards looking at this ayah and making ourselves available for enjoining piety? Ad break, and we'll be right back, inshallah.
Radio Ramadan 365, sound for the soul.
टॉपरी गार्डन्स, जहाँ पर खसूसी रमजान ऑफर्स दस्तयाब हैं। क्वालिटी सबसे आला और वैरायटी सबसे जुदा। मुफ्त सब्जियों और फलों की बेशुमार वैरायटीज मौजूद हैं, जहाँ पर आप ले सकते हैं KTC वेजिटेबल ऑयल 5 लीटर सिर्फ $6.99 के लिए और 1 kg हल्दी सिर्फ $1.99 के लिए। रूह अफ़ज़ा only $2.75। जिंदगी की तमाम जरूरियात एक ही छत के नीचे। टॉपरी गार्डन्स, 11 Fore Street, Polishers, Glasgow.
Awarded the UK's Best Muslim Charity of the Year, Muslim Global Relief, bringing hope to life for 20 years in over 40 countries around the world. Every water pump you helped to install, every needy person you helped to feed, every orphan child that you sent to school has a powerful impact on people's lives. Let us continue to make change. Make a 100% zakat donation today. Visit muslimglobalrelief.org.
If you or someone you know is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or at risk of developing type 2 diabetes, our team in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde can help you to learn more and take control of your condition. We can support you through a range of services and can provide interpreters if needed. We also have resources in Urdu, Punjabi and Arabic. Find out more at www.nhsggc.scot/T2 Diabetes Hub or call our hub on 0141 531 8901.
Radio Ramadan 365, sound for the soul.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى
No, but indeed man transgresses,
أن رآه استغنى
because he sees himself self-sufficient.
إن إلى ربك الرجعى
Indeed, to your Lord is the return.
أرأيت الذي ينهى
Have you seen the one who forbids,
عبدا إذا صلى
a servant when he prays?
أرأيت إن كان على الهدى
Have you seen if he is upon guidance,
أو أمر بالتقوى
or enjoins righteousness?
أرأيت إن كذب وتولى
Have you seen if he denies and turns away?
ألم يعلم بأن الله يرى
Does he not know that Allah sees?
كلا لئن لم ينته لنسفعا بالناصية
No. If he does not desist, we will surely drag him by the forelock.
ناصية كاذبة خاطئة
A lying, sinning forelock.
فليدع ناديه
Then let him call his associates.
سندع الزبانية
We will call the angels of hell.
كلا لا تطعه واسجد واقترب
No, do not obey him, but prostrate and draw near to Allah.
Radio Ramadan Reflections. I'm your host Zubair Akram with my guest Sheikh Rizwan. Today iftar is going to be at 8:18, 18th of Ramadan, 9th of April 2023. Just before the break, this ayah now, the next one. أرأيت الذي إن كان على الهدى, even before that, أرأيت الذي ينهى عبدا إذا صلى. And a servant when he prays, and then it goes on to أرأيت إن كان على الهدى. Did you consider what if he's on the right way and enjoins piety? أو أمر بالتقوى. Is it for us, and how does it relate to us?
Yeah, so I think we did cover this, or did we cover this yesterday?
No, not this one, not this particular ayah.
Oh, okay. So let's have a look then. So,
أو أمر بالتقوى and enjoins piety.
all right, okay. So, yeah, so it's asking us to make a distinction. It's asking us to make an observation. The observation is essentially in a situation where you have an oppressor and an oppressed. Okay, essentially, we're looking at the story. It's very clear who's the oppressor, who's the oppressed. It's then asking you, Ara'aita. Ara'aita is looking for your, and this is in fact a very, very powerful method in the Quran to convince people and to educate people and to persuade people. Persuasion is a very interesting art. The art of persuasion, the art of convincing, the art of bringing people around to a view that you have is a very, a kind of very precious skill. In marketing, for example, marketing is all based upon convincing you to buy this rather than that. So you've got numerous companies selling the same thing. And essentially this is exactly the same thing. But the way of doing it is like, Nike, for example. Is it Nike or Nike? I don't know how you pronounce it. Nike, yeah.
Nike.
So, yeah, I think, or was it Apple? It was Apple or Nike. So they had this very famous campaign, advertising campaign. And I think it was the first campaign, it was Apple actually, in which it might be wrong actually with Nike, in which they essentially didn't market what they were doing or what they were selling. They were saying that we ally ourselves with these great people. There was like Muhammad Ali, it was like Nelson Mandela. So people that everyone wants to be like. They were saying we should be like them. And who are we? We're Apple or we're Nike. So the whole thing is that you get people to buy into this sense of, I think Nike as well, they do this thing of just do it. So in other
Just do
words,
it.
it's empowering you. It's not saying wear Nike. Whereas Adidas is the opposite. Adidas is always saying wear Adidas, and Adidas makes you run faster and this and that. People don't care about that. People want to be enticed into making a decision based upon their own choice. In other words, you have to ally with the emotion of the person. So the Quran, the reason I'm saying this is because in the Quran it has this all the time. Ara'aita. It's the moment it says, "Do you not think?" Or do you not consider? It's pulling you as a listener, looking at this situation. It's saying, "What do you think of this?" Let's talk about this. Ara'aita alladhi yanha. Let's have a look at this. What do you think of this person that forbids yanha abdan idha salla? A person who just prays. A servant, abd. So abd is used here because it's an honor of the Prophet ﷺ, first of all. But what I'm thinking about is, I don't know if there's mentioned in tafsir books, but abd is also mentioned because abd is not competing with you for anything. Do you know when you think of, Abu Jahl, he's thinking, I want to have leadership of the Meccan society. I want to have privilege. I want to be sitting at the table, meeting and signing letters to Khusro and the Byzantine and the Copts. I want to be this person everyone comes to my house to. Yeah, no, he wants that. And he thinks he's competing with the Prophet ﷺ for this, worldly privilege. And Allah is saying to us, not saying to Abu Jahl, he's saying, what do you think of this person who forbids abdan idha salla? Not the king. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. There's absolutely there's no comparison at all, because one is competing for something which is dear to him, the world, the jah.
Yeah.
The jah.
Jah. Hubb al-jah. Yeah, the love of prestige, notoriety.
उसको तो jah चाहिए, लेकिन अब्द को तो jah चाहिए नहीं.
Exactly.
अब तो पहले अब तो अब्द है, अब्द पहले ही
He doesn't care. Like your games, even in this whole thing that was happening over the last couple of weeks, I was thinking these are games. Like there's essentially a game going on here for clicks and likes and echo chambers and all the rest of it, and feeling good about yourself. So the Quran is in this situation is doing this master stroke of the reader who will read this in the future is asked to give an opinion, because the Quran does consider your opinion to be important for yourself, not for truth, but for you to change. So it says, what do you think? If you've seen this person who forbids what? Forbids a simple servant when he prays to God, not when he vies with you for political authority and power and privilege in a tribe or a society. He's just so. What do you think then? Is he on the right path? Ara'aita in kana ala al-huda? Like, come on, tell me. Between you and me, it's like, do you think this person's righteous, on truth, and huda, which is like the right path? Huda is like this path which is clear and pure and correct. Or amara bit-taqwa? Do you think he's ordering something which is virtuous? So taqwa here doesn't mean, in our sense of God consciousness, it means virtuous, because it's obvious he wants to be virtuous. Abu Jahl wants to be virtuous. It's a good quality to be virtuous and to be allied with noble qualities. And so we're in this conversation voting, essentially. Like we're essentially being asked to vote personally. We're saying, I think, yes, he should do that. He should stop our servant from praying in public. This is what happens in France. And, in Switzerland, they're banning the building of minarets, for example. And in France, they're refusing women going into public spaces with headscarves on. It's the same thing. You take this verse and you apply it to the French context. It's exactly the same. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يَنْهَى عَبْدًا إِذَا صَلَّى. Do you not see the person that forbids a servant, and in this situation, a female servant who's trying to get around and live her faith as she insists that she should, when they're just being obedient?
Just for kind of taking a pause and coming to this day and age just right now, where do you see, is this a fear of something that's causing some of the Western nations to do what they're doing? What's the fear? What's the underlying fear?
Well, that's a fantastic.
Is it bigotry? Is it fear?
That's a fantastic question. That's a fantastic question. I did a course. I always do courses. I did a course, Islam in the West, and essentially, I think if you want to summarize it, is the West has no identity, and it fears looking into the mirror and seeing nothing, and so it has to kill the only thing that has entity and identity, which is Islam. Simple as that. And if you want to go deep down, you want to deep dive in this, and you just want to say what the issue is. It's they have nothing. Their values are defined by what Islam is not. So their values are defined by what Islam is not Islam.
Okay, Sheikh. Okay, just compare hospital with hospital. A hospital in Lahore and a hospital in Glasgow.
Okay.
The humanity, the humanity that is prevalent there, the care, the ultimate care, and then the commercialism. Here's a Muslim land, and here is a Western place, right? Regard for traffic, stopping, looking.
Yeah, I understand. I understand exactly what you're saying. You're jumping onto.
Where's this?
Yeah, this is different from what you asked. I didn't ask this. You didn't ask this. You said, why are Western nations oppressing Muslims and Muslim identity? So that was your question, wasn't it? And I said at the identity level.
What's the underlying fear? But then you say they have nothing. What I'm saying is, what you observe, what you live, you wonder, what is it that we have missed?
No, that's a different.
What is they've imbibed?
Yeah, so this is there's numerous logical fallacies in that proposition, because what you're saying is why do the West fear? What is it about Islam that they don't want, that is encroaching into public life? A person just being religious in public life. Okay, you could join with what you're saying. If I wanted to join up and say, okay, this is what you meant, is that if we allow religion to come into public life, our societies will become like Muslim societies. Okay, that's the best you can salvage from that, because you'll say, okay, the reason why they're stopping women with hijabs going to a school, for example, is this is going to lead to one step up, creeping Sharia or whatever, or a slippery slope. If you allow Muslims to do this, the next thing you know, they'll have Muslim hospitals which will have really poor patient care and all the rest of it. That's the kind of argument. But this is an argument in logic called ab absurdum, which is it's just going nowhere. But let's just run with that. Okay. The reasons for all this stuff in certain Muslim lands, not all Muslim lands, like in Turkey, for example, the health system here, public health system here is, I had to call the ambulance like 2 months ago. It came in, I think, 10 minutes or something.
Okay.
It was like, I hadn't even put the phone down, put my shoes on, and the ambulance was outside. And the care and the processing of it actually is better than in Britain, because I spent 8 months trying to get a consultant to recognize that they'd lost my files. So I understand what you're saying, but that's built upon, if you want to actually talk about that, that's built on centuries of privileged colonialism, which, I mean, you think of the amount of wealth taken out of pre-partition India by the British Empire. We're talking about trillions of dollars, trillions. Do you understand? But on the back of that, you build infrastructure, you leverage that. And then obviously that is why, if you look at post-partition India and look at Pakistan, for example, they've set in place systems which will always lead to the nation itself not being able to better itself. And so there's in Africa is the same thing. The French neo-colonialist project in Africa, for example, is exactly the same. It's the same as going there and putting people in chains. It's worse. And so, the comparison of Muslim public life and Muslim lands and services and debt and economic situation is not related to Islam in as much as it's related to the tughyan of the West, the complicity of the West in setting up systems. This is well known. I don't have to argue this case. The systems that have
No,
been set up.
I'm genuinely asking these two things. One is the claim they have nothing. What I'm saying is that they have
No. In terms of
values.
list, the claim is no. I'm talking about. We're talking about identity. The thing that, because it goes back to your original question, is why are the West doing this to Muslims, and why are they so hateful towards Muslims? It's because, I mean, where Europe and throughout its history has always defined itself not by what Europe is, but by what Islam is, and meaning that we're not Muslims. The moment you take Islam out of the picture, what brings Europe together are a number of values that they themselves don't agree with. And so the thing that unifies the West is this hatred of Islam, historically, through the Byzantine incursions with the Prophet ﷺ, to the Crusades, to the Ottoman wars, the Battle of Vienna, and the Muslim encroachments, Umayyad encroachments into France, for example, always defined Europe. So anytime they wanted to define themselves.
Are we saying the Renaissance, the French Renaissance, is defined by Muslim hate? Are we saying that the values that the West is built upon is based on the hatredness of another nation, like the liberal values?
So if you want to look at what the West is, like how it's different from the East, or how Europe is different from, like, Turkey, for example.
Okay.
Sarkozy, who was the previous president of France, he in his memoirs he explained why he opposed Turkish membership to the European Union. And he says, how can we allow into our European club a nation which is by its very entity not European, i.e. Muslim? So, the moment that you had to say, okay, who can come into European Union, who can't? It wasn't about geography, it wasn't about social criteria, economic criteria, conditions to membership. It was about they're Muslims. In other words, the thing that we are is a Christian club. And in fact, not even now it's a historically Christian. They're all atheists. The majority of Europe is edging on the precipice of atheism. But what defines them, we become Christian as a culture the moment that Islam is brought into comparison with us. That's the point I'm making. That the reason why you have Western pushback on Islam specifically is that it reminds them of what they have lost, which is any kind of religious impulse. And the fact that Islam takes itself seriously, Muslims take themselves seriously as a religious tradition. And that in and of itself is a sufficient reason why the West is caught off guard in this situation. Now, think of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, all these things have their root. The good of it has its root in Islamic. The Renaissance, for example, has its root in the transmission of Greek philosophy and Arab logic and learning in through the Umayyad dynasties into France and into Italy, Bologna University, Paris University. These are all built on the basic principles of Muslim universities, studied and well researched. This is how they started the period of Renaissance and Enlightenment. Essentially, they wanted to copy what Muslim intellectuals had been doing. So this is the enlightened of the European minds. Erasmus, you've got Nietzsche, you've got Goethe, you've got all these great thinkers. Aquinas, imbued with understandings of Islamic theology. So the best of it they took. But the thing, once atheism and the demotion of religion became the calling card in Europe after the 70s, then Islam became like a thorn, a thorn in the side. And this is why this verse, which we're talking about, becomes absolutely relevant. Have you not seen the person that forbids the servant? Have you not seen the one that forbids the servant when they pray? In other words, shows outward manifestation of devotion. That they're not there to take your power. Like a woman in France going about her business in a public institution is not there to undermine the state. She just wants to manifest her religious faith. And the whole thing is that they think that's not the case. They think, and this is, if you read French commentary on this, they'll say, well, she's there to undermine the state. She's there to sport Islamist tendencies, to undermine the secular nature of laicity in the French state, She's not. She's just there because her faith and her connection to her creator is such that she says, this is how I manifest it. And so this story, which is the story of the Prophet ﷺ with Abu Jahl, is a story of Musa with Fir'aun, is a story of, Aisha in Paris trying to go to school. Same story. History repeats itself, rinse and repeat. Everything is simple because at the end of it, there's a very clear paradigm of people that insist on inbuilt privilege and power, and the fear of that is taken away by people that are principled. Simple as that. You just be principled. You don't have to have any army. You don't have to have power at all. You just have to have the principle. Listen, Nelson Mandela came out of prison. He had a principle. The principle was the prophetic principle that every single person on the face of this earth, regardless of skin and ethnicity, is exactly the same in the eyes of God. That's his principle. That principle, he had nothing else. What did he have? He had the principle. He said, who's going to come stand behind me on that principle? That's all he did. He didn't have any armed struggle. He said, I've got this principle which is more mighty than any nation that we have, more mighty than the fact that Britain insisted on supporting the apartheid regime under Thatcher, for example. America insisted on supporting it. Every single Western nation insisted on supporting the apartheid nation. And he just came out of prison and said, guys, I've got this principle that to differentiate between people on the basis of the color of your skin is oppression. Who's with me on that? That's all he did. Nothing else. And then all of a sudden, everyone falls in line. Because the moment you make it clear on that in that way, the moment you say this is the principle we're talking about here, without muddying it, and always in these situations, the moment that you dither and you say, oh well, there's a reason why we have apartheid, and there's economic factors and this and that, and I don't like this and I don't like that, and if we allow Black people to have their own privileged political status, this is going to happen. Once you dither on any issue that is clear, you've lost. So this is the thing in life: you'd never dither on things that are clear. The things that people disagree upon, they're in the background. In important situations, you make the one statement very clear, everything else falls in place after that. So this is like apartheid. He just made a very clear decision. Every other, subsection of arguments fell in place behind that. It's the same thing with think of any issue you can think about in modern day and age, Muslim or non-Muslim issue. It's the same thing. What is the thing that's non-negotiable in this situation? Your bickering on other things is irrelevant. What's the thing that you cannot? And I remember this is the thing. This is the reason why I spoke about takfir so clearly. Is that in all of these things, that is the one thing that you do not touch, because it's like Al-Ghazali said, Al-Ismatu al-Mustafadu min la ilaha illallah la yuzulu illa biyaqeen. Now that is like the pillar of la ilaha. He's saying that the pillar of la ilaha illallah, the protection it gives you, cannot be removed except by something that is absolute. And so that is the big principle in that discussion. And in this discussion, it's very simple. Who's with me on the fact that people can have the ability to practice their faith freely? Everyone should have that.
We end today's reflections on saying that the fear of the West is they don't have identity.
No, and that's not what I said. I said the thing that the West fears is the moment you take Islam out of the equation and you're left looking at the mirror of yourself and what your values are and who you are. There's so many different things that there's nothing at the core of that defines you as Europe, for example. Historically, I said, Europe always defined itself as being the land which was not Islamic. Historically. And to this day, it still falls back into this situation now. The West is insisting, and Europe specifically is insisting, that we're going to continue that defining. And that's one of the big battles for Muslims in the West now. One of the big struggles of the Muslims in the West is that they have to start to be influential in public discourse to the point that they say, look, that's the old Europe. The Europe is different. If you look at, and I was actually watching a video I did on, I did the gender course a couple of years, last year or something, and I did a live Q&A. There was a section there about Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray is homosexual. Okay, very famous right-wing public figure, commentator, and he wrote an article warning Europe of the fact that it will not be able to populate itself because the Muslim population is increasing in Europe. He said to the point that Europe will become Muslim. And I, as a joke, I said to him, Douglas Murray, do something about it. And you know what that means? Like, well, you've decided through your life choices. Like, you can't argue a case and then, as a man, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So the thing is that fear. So it was, I don't know where that came. It was like I was with Sheikh Hassan Rabbani. We were talking. It just came to my mind because I watch so much stuff because I like to know what's happening in the world. And not to have anything against his lifestyle. He's a non-Muslim. He can do what he wants. I don't really want to delve into his private life, but he openly says he is. And I just noticed the paradox, which I called the Murray paradox. So it's a paradox which he created himself. Douglas Murray, it's a Douglas Murray paradox. He created himself, and he can't sort it out. I just pointed out the fact it's a paradox, a logical fallacy. And so this is where Europe is. This is where Europe is. That fear that Douglas Murray has of Islam growing is the reason why you have all this far right rhetoric. This is the reason you have the Conservative Party insisting on no immigration. And it's essentially because the people coming are Muslims. Just remember that the underlying, if you look at the people that are spearheading this campaign against migrants, are people that are very Islamophobic. I don't like to use that word anyway. Anti-Muslim. They don't want the European, the non-Muslim nature of Europe to change. Deep down, I know that for a fact. Deep down, that's what's moving them. They're not going to say it in public, but that's essentially what it is. And so, as Muslims in the West, it leaves us with a very interesting question: how are we going to engage with this public discourse? Because we're extremely naive. I always say this: Muslims are really late to the party here. Like, they're really naive in terms of how the world works. Really naive in terms of how politics works. Extremely naive on how to stop yourselves being lynched as a community. If you look at history, if you're just on the sidelines in this ghetto, at some point someone will say, who's living in that ghetto?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you understand? Do you understand? I mean, I'm not being stupid here. I'm saying the reality. History exactly. Plays itself out, and I just feel that Muslims, the moment they get slightly perturbed or scared, they go into illogical mode. Illogical, like they just talk gibberish.
Intelligently carved out situations like Nelson Mandela and Ibrahim Rasool.
Do you know this? I mean, if people are not educated, I can't help them, to be honest. I mean, if you don't have a sense of historical perspective, I'm here to give you a historical perspective for what it's worth. I think it's life and death sometimes. It's important that you understand we're more than just our day-to-day, daily, 9 to 5 that we're living and just raising our heads above the parapet sometimes and seeing where the world is. If you look at what the world is going through, the Russian-Ukraine war is precipitating a very tumultuous situation in human history. The movement of China and even brokering peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and what that effect's going to have on American homogeny, which is good, but how that tectonic shift is going to play out in terms of everything else having to be realigned is going to be tectonic. And, it's going to affect us in some way. And we have to have a voice there that represents us, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. That's all we have for today's reflections. Inshallah, tomorrow again with Sheikh Rizwan. And it is going to be Sheikh Rizwan tomorrow as well. I'm just announcing it on air and letting Sheikh Rizwan know as well.
What?
So, so tomorrow's reflections is going to be with the same guest, inshallah. Tuesday is going to be Sheikh Amir Jamil. And until then, tomorrow, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.